So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our third installment of our AISA webcasts, or webinars rather. Tonight, it will be me, Nick Jana, from ICS International Community School of Addis Ababa, Deputy Principal, interviewing Mr. Simon Gillespie. So, to give a brief introduction about our dear friend Simon Gillespie, he is currently the director, rather, I was going to say principal, the director of the American School of Kinshasa in the DRC. And tonight's focus on our conversation is inclusive schools. So you will also see on this, I guess, the right-hand corner, a little chat box. Feel free to use it as you hear Mr. Gillespie's answers. Or if you have any questions for Simon or I, you're more than welcome to just go ahead and type them in, and hopefully we get to your questions. So we see, I know that Noah is here, Jerome is here, Bridget, Mary, Ryan, Deb, and Andreas are here. For Falarin at the International School of Lagos, and Todd. So without further ado, Mr. Simon, how are you this evening, this Halloween evening?
Yes, I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for spending time with me.
I'm looking forward to it. So this, as it being our third installment of the AISA webinars, I guess we'll jump right into it. In short, and talking about inclusivity, and even with the questions that are being asked, what does an inclusive school look like, and how personally did you get into this line of work of inclusive schooling?
Great. Yeah, I see on the right side of the chat that there's about 6 or so people from IS Uganda, which is where I'm moving to next year. So no pressure for me to show off. So hi ISU people, glad you're there. Yeah, my journey started when I began teaching. I started teaching in Canada. I was an elementary school teacher, and I think it was about my third year in Canada, and I had a student in my class, and her name was Danielle, and she had some very serious conditions. She had a genetic disorder that affected her growth, her speech, and her cognitive development, and her parents were strong advocates of inclusion. They wanted her included fully in the classroom in the school. And, I was excited to take on the challenge. I was nervous as anything. I had no real skill in special education. And I just welcomed her into my classroom. She had a full-time assistant, and away we went. It was grade 4. Danielle joined the class. We had our tables and chairs and circles, and mostly what Danielle did to start with was, from time to time, she would say my name and giggle and carry on. And I found ways to just include her in the room, whether it was, having her shout out a word or a letter, or involve her in group work with other students. The assistant teacher would, from time to time, take on the whole class, and I would work with Danielle, or recess time, I would go and play with her while the assistant had a break, and we just kept working together. And I just did what felt normal. And one day, Danielle, it was kind of mid-year, she took her first steps in our classroom, and she's 9 years old and started walking, and we were super excited, and we sent her for the first time in her life on her own down the hallway to take the attendance, to cheers and the class erupting, and Danielle giggled the whole way. Unfortunately, the next day when she was walking, she tripped and fell and broke her arm, but we still took it as a win. And around that time, it was parent-teacher conference time, and the parents came in, and they were quite emotional, and they started to cry, and they thanked me and for how much we had done for Danielle. And I kind of just sat there thinking, why are they thanking me? I've not done anything special. And I remember, thinking, I was going to be having to defend some of the mistakes I made as I was working with Danielle and what have you. And so I naively asked them, why are you thanking me, basically? And they basically said that Danielle had never been included, and the assistant had never been included in the class before. Mm-hmm. They always sat at the back of the room and were not included. And what really resonated with me in that moment was what I thought I was just doing would be what any normal person would do. I didn't think I was doing anything special. And so I was kind of taken aback by the fact that wouldn't a child just normally be included? And so that's really what got me thinking. When I moved to international schools, though, I was faced with this challenge. I started at International School Manila, and I was the elementary assistant principal and then principal, and we kept having to exit our students from grade 5 moving into middle school because the middle school student couldn't take them. And it was even one point where we had a child in grade 5 who had a brain aneurysm, and he became partially paralyzed, lost speech and language. And the questions that were being asked by other leaders in the school was, well, we can't possibly support this child. We can't possibly. It was all we can't. So we were looking at it from a deficit model and not from a model of what do we need to do, what do we need to change in terms of our organizational mindset. And that was huge, huge moment for me as well, and my involvement with inclusion internationally. I became involved in the organization Next Frontier Inclusion with Bill and Ochin Powell, Kristen Palche, and Kevin Bartlett, and have been involved with them for the past 9 years. And our goal is to help schools become inclusive, and so my work there, and then my doctoral dissertation work as well, was in inclusion and the role of leaders. So that's just a little bit about my journey to get where I am, and just those passions, and oftentimes it's that helping that mindset. All children have different challenges, and that we need to figure out how best to support them. In terms of them, your question, what does an inclusive school look like? I think inclusion is definitely not a place. It's a mindset that's supported by systems and principles. I kind of laugh when I came to TASOC. I put this sign purposely behind me. I don't know if you can see that, but it says slow school. And there were 6 of these all over campus. They were basically, telling drivers to drive slowly. But myself and the learning support teacher, when I first came here, we laughed hysterically. I was drawn to this school because it's the slow school. So those signs have since been taken down, and I kept one for nostalgia's sake. But it is, it's that mindset. And so when we look at inclusion definitions, and there's many out there, and there's not necessarily one single definition, but it's all about having a common language and a common understanding. So NFI has a clear definition of inclusive schools, and it's based on International School of Brussels, which is basically schools that successfully serve a managed number of students representing the full range of learning differences, mild, moderate, and intensive needs, and the exceptionally able. I've also gone on to look at other research. One of the researchers in inclusion, Grima Farrell, Bain, and McDonough, they talk about inclusion as being described and defined as an approach focused on responding to diversity of student needs in ways that are beneficial to students with and without disabilities. And so that's kind of more that global, what impact is it having on the whole school? Within our international school context, we've often talked and celebrated diversity, and we talk about how it's great to have this diversity of nationalities and diversity of people in our schools, and it's a hallmark of our organizations. But we've often left off the diversity of the ways that children learn and learn differently. And so I think that notion of allowing all students to engage together with resources, with managed numbers, and an appropriate learning environment.
So I guess the question leads me to think is, being here at ICS, or International Community School Addis Ababa, it being an AISA school, is that we have programs set in place. So a student support team that are running a STEP program within our school, and with this, again, it's full integration where some skills are being taught by specialized teachers. Your experience is that, if I go back to the first anecdote you were explaining, is that you had a student, this young lady by the name of Daniela, put into your class and didn't feel like you had those resources set in place, that almost the onus and responsibility rather fell onto you. When you went international, there was more of maybe more of a support in the sense where, particularly as a role as an administrator, you recognizing the slow school kind of idea, which is, there might be students who learn differently or are different mobility, different ability, and that when you say select number of select number of inclusion, can you expand on that a little bit when you're talking about what makes someone fall into the category of being in that select number of inclusion rather a full number inclusion? And I guess the precipice for this question is one of the Q&As that asks is an inclusive school within a school, or is it of the school, or is it inside a larger school? How do those numbers act in the normal everyday occurrence or normal everyday routine of the school setting where you're at now?
Yeah. So we've often, in the past, international schools have had more exclusive admissions policies, and so they have a student with learning needs, and they're not including them in their program because they don't have the resources or they don't have the will to serve, basically. And so when we talk about becoming inclusive, it's not about necessarily opening up the doors and accepting any child. It's about figuring out what resources do we have in place and what resources can we support our students with realistically. And then within that, what are those managed numbers? What does that look like? So when I use the example of TASOC in Kinshasa, I look at when I came here, we didn't have a concrete admissions policy. And we probably had about 20 students in the school that needed some form of support, more mild or moderate levels of support. And at that time, we had a teacher that was 0.25% working to support students that were in the school. So the shift that we've made is to have an admissions policy that is clear about what types of students we can serve and can't serve. And then we set about to put the resources in place to match that. So we now have 2 learning support teachers, 2 AL teachers, 2 counselors. We're very realistic in our context here. We do not have outside resources. So we don't have the community speech and language therapists. We don't have an ed psych. We don't have occupational therapy here. So we've had to be creative in some ways. So we use an online speech and language therapist. We use an ed psych named Michelle Ireland, who comes from Cape Town, and she's actually here right now. She may actually be in on the webinar right now, but she is coming here for 3 weeks. She's testing 10 students, observing them in classrooms, meeting with parents, teachers. So we've had to kind of accommodate and build within our context. But now we can say we can meet the needs of those students that are in our school. And when we're looking at admissions, we're doing that effectively. And just one anecdote to look at that. When I came here, we had a child in kindergarten, and she was accepted. And she had a condition called Rett syndrome. And Rett syndrome is a disorder that is degenerative. And so at a certain period, a child, if they're not receiving the proper services, therapies, can start losing language, can start losing fine motor control skills. And this child was having seizures, and there was not the proper pediatric medical care within Kinshasa in the country. And so I had to work extensively with the parents to help them understand their child's needs. And at the end of the day, I had to tell them we couldn't meet their child's needs, and we had to unenroll them from the school. And I really encouraged them to go back to their home country where the child was getting the medical support, because she was losing ethically. It wasn't working. And so the numbers that we're talking about are managed. And when you look at there's statistics of the general population, and I'm just trying to look at what they are. But there's a notion of whatever it is, and don't quote me on this right now because I don't have it in front of me. Oh, here it is. 10% of school-age population require learning support reflective of mild learning needs. 2 to 3% require moderate support, and 1% of the population require intensive support. And so if you apply those global numbers to a school context, those would be kind of some of the numbers that you would look at maybe trying to set up your program for or have the resources for. But again, it's figuring out what is that managed number in your context. Here in Kinshasa, it's very different for us. resource. We can't take the intensive need children, but other schools or contexts where maybe they have more integrated, OT on campus, medical care in the country that matches what a child would need is there.
Well, I think as far as the AISA school context too, right? It's that, we are international schools and we're trying to do the best that we can, and we don't often have access or all the access we might have in the West or something like this. So we are, some schools I've heard are, and maybe not part of our association, but are almost patchwork, and we're looking for these resources. So I guess my next question kind of actually really next up is, as a leader of a school, what are some considerations that you need to make, or what are some things that you would do in order to, one, support teachers and support TAs in your inclusive school, and two, I guess it's more of a systems question, curious about, how much allotted time do you have, or what kind of numbers, moving a teacher from a 0.25 to a 1.0. Again, looking at the whole idea of that managed number, what is the ratio that you would do as a leader? So these are the types of questions that I'd like to go into next. Is you being the administrator of change, what does that look like in more of an African perspective?
So yeah, first, just but the research I did on my dissertation was on this concept of the role of the leader in international schools, moving towards being inclusive, and it was interesting because I did my case study work at one of the schools was in Africa on the continent, and there were 6 main things that kind of came up within the research, and the first was the leader needs to really lead by that example and support the concept of inclusion. And we often raise academics and athletics in our schools to a high status. And there's been a lot of, there's been some research and talk about the notion of raising status of a particular group. And so, for example, there's an article written in Ed Leadership by Bill and Ochin Powell that is just on that notion of when we raise the status of learning support, whether it be the teachers or students, we're making them a part of the whole school and what we're basically doing. And so the first thing in terms of the role of the leader is to physically, be stating that we are an inclusive school, that we support all learners, and then helping to develop that common understanding and that culture for supporting inclusion. For example, at my school in Manila, International School Manila, we were a school of 2,200 students, and when we were starting to be inclusive, our director, David Toes, stood up in front of the whole faculty and declared that we are all teachers of English language learners, and we are all teachers of students who learn differently. And that really set the tone and set the impetus then for the principals, for the department heads to take ownership of that and do something with it, and not be afraid to accept that challenge, and to then look at what resources we need. It was interesting in the research I was doing as well. At one point, the leaders I was talking to had a moment when they were working with their faculties and they were having discussions, and there was clearly a disconnect with what the leaders thought was happening in their schools with inclusion, for example, and what the teachers thought was happening, and the reality in the ground with what was happening. And so the leader making sure that there is that connect, that it's not just being talked about as being, oh, we're inclusive and this is happening, but backing it up with the support and making sure that the reality is happening. And so, yeah, resources need to be put in place, whether that's models of inclusion, whether we're talking co-teaching models or pull-out models, whatever support is needed, whether we're bringing in resources, speech and language, OT, and of course that's dependent on the resources we have in our schools. Mm-hmm. When we look at a school, schools that have more resources versus those that don't, there is going to be differences, and what types of challenges we can take on. ISM has moved to a complete model of fully supporting intensive students with intensive needs, and those students are included when it's appropriate in terms of different advisory programs, classes, and then they're provided support for their specific needs. That school has a lot of resource and a lot of money and a lot of ability to do that. We can't do that here, so we have to be realistic with what we're doing. The other piece there is in terms of raising the status as well is supporting the teachers and supporting the learning support teachers to be leaders. Learning support teachers cannot just be teachers of students, they need to be teachers of adults as well. And that can sometimes be happening explicitly and sometimes implicitly. And so that kind of coaching, that working alongside teachers to support scaffolding, to support curriculum development, and then also getting up and providing workshops on differentiation or on different types of learners, on their expertise on autism and how we're supporting this learner in our school that is autistic, for example. And so the leader's job is to raise that profile and make sure those learning support teachers, for example, are seen as leaders in the school, and leaders of teaching, of teacher learning as well. So the resources in terms of making sure we have the personnel, the physical resources, and supporting that as well. And you asked for some, specific concrete, what does that look like? I mean, we looked in our context here, and I knew what our budget was, and I knew what we could afford. Right. And I had to look at, we had to start charging parents an additional fee. We have 2 students that have a one-on-one teacher assistant, and we had to again have our learning support personnel that had the ability to work with these assistants, to provide them with training, to look at that level of support. It's interesting, I was talking with a head of school at a small school in West Africa a month ago, and they accepted a student, and the student has a one-on-one assistant, but the one-on-one assistant has no one to get support with. And so in our context here, our learning support teacher in Kinshasa is now Skyping regularly with that assistant teacher to help them, provide some support. Not an ideal situation, of course, but trying to find ways to make those connections. But digressing a little bit there. But the notion of knowing your context, knowing what resources you can put in place, and then being realistic with the community as well. And our learning support teachers here, and I and our team principals, our SST team here, we're often talking about what we're doing well and what we're struggling with, and then looking back at, we needed another counselor, so we hired another counselor type of thing, and I had to be the one to fight for that. And
so I guess, again, I like this, the idea of, and I don't believe it actually was a digression, I think it's fully moving forward, is the SST team, and looking at what the comments and questions that are being asked are these, when in particularly in recruitment, I know, so I'm from Canada, and you can get an additional qualification in specialized or special education. So are you, when it comes to recruitment time, are you selecting candidates that have this as a background, as part of your SST team? Excuse me. Yeah. And then second is, I think the other fantastic value of being part of an AISA school is also that we are able to share these resources as well. So if I know here we have a really powerful student support teacher, or a teacher with specialization in special education, and again, like a webinar with you, how can we use these resources to be more beneficial to everybody a part of our association, and to really all the classes that we have across Africa?
Yeah, definitely. No, and that's I think that's obviously supporting each other is huge, and I think definitely within our context and the work I've been doing. You talked about hiring first of all, and I think I think it's crucial to get that right. As leaders, we need to know what profile of teacher we're looking for. And I think, NFI has a number of resources, and if you're an NFI member school, you have access to them. But one of them is a toolkit for inclusive schools. And in there is a protocol for hiring that has specific questions and attributes you could be looking for. It's interesting because I look at the role of the leader. I'm not a trained special education teacher. I've done a lot of reading. I've done a lot of studying. I've done that a lot myself. And I was a year or so ago, I was a team that was doing a review of a learning support program at a bigger international school in Europe. And the deputy head of teaching and learning was engaging in conversations with us. And she kept using the default, I don't know, I'm not an expert in that field, and so I can't support that development. And I ended up sitting down with her at one point, just one-on-one, and I had the conversation with her. As the leader of the school and as the leader of wanting to be an inclusive school, you need to move beyond that. You need to, if you don't know, then you need to know. And you need
the whole idea of the mindset too, right?
Right, exactly.
Leadership modeling and leadership mindset in supporting all teachers. That if we say, well, I don't know about that, that's not enough.
Right.
So
and I mean, I didn't know anything about Rett syndrome, and so I researched and I talked to some experts. I did some reading and made sure I understood before I started, supporting that parent and making those decisions and realizing that and knowing what medical help this family needed and that type of thing as well too. So that's in terms of the leadership, but it is for teachers as well. It's that mindset of you're going to have children in your class that are going to need some extra support or are going to need you to collaborate with the learning support teacher to get that support and do that planning. And so when we're hiring, we really need to make sure we have those people that want to engage in collaboration and that have that mindset. And even learning support teachers as well. There's different types of trained learning support teachers, and some that have just kind of focused on doing resource room and that full pull-out model or different model, and then others that have that inclusive model and want to engage. Being a learning support teacher is a huge skill in terms of being able to collaborate, to build relationships with all the different teachers and all the different styles of teachers, and then and be the one that's kind of sometimes taking the higher ground to take that step back in that relationship building, to know that I'm here to advocate for that student and to support that teacher and realize that, okay, I'm going to have to take a step back and work on this relationship a bit more so I can fully help this teacher. And sometimes that's a long-term commitment to do that. And after a while you get that win and things are going great or the relationship is there. So that hiring piece is absolutely huge.
So in regards to keeping the accommodations, to making sure that the accommodations are being met within the classroom, that's really the responsibility of your SST team and of that learning support teacher, is that those accommodations within the particular subject areas are being met too. So does that fall more on kind of a leadership role in your inclusivity model, or does that fall more on a teacher and student support team?
I think it's everyone. I mean, I look at sometimes I've worked with teachers before that are struggling with a student, and they're frustrated, they're concerned, and then when you start talking, you realize that their expectation for that student is that that student has to reach all the standards of everyone else. And so sometimes the leader's role, and I've done this many times, is to kind of say, this is the expectation for this student, not up here. It's okay if this child isn't getting to here. That's not a reflection of your teaching or who you are. We need to work together and put the supports in place to, this child just needs to write 2 sentences. They don't need to write, a 10-page essay type of thing. And so helping them to realize what the expectations are and have that level of support. And then in terms of as being an inclusive school, and if everyone has that common understanding and common definition and common knowledge of their students, then it's everyone's role to contribute that. Yeah, it's the learning support teacher's role to provide resources, to provide strategies, accommodations, and that, and it's the teacher's role to help implement those or to help give feedback on that implementation piece, and to be maintaining that level of communication.
So I guess my next question is maybe a little bit curricular. Then do you have different pathways, particularly for your high school students or high school graduation requirements in regards to getting that diploma? Like, for example, here we're an IB school, so we have an IB pathway. We also have a diploma pathway. We also have a graduation. So we also have, in being in an inclusive school also, is we have pathways for students in our STEP, our EAL, and these programs where it's not a matter of just accommodations, but actually modifications into what they're graduating with in order for them to continue on to universities, international universities. Is this is another consideration that you guys are making as well?
Yeah, definitely. And we don't fully have that right. I mean, we've just started, we have our first cohort of IB students this year, and we have a small group, 17, and 13 of them are doing the full diploma. 2 of them are doing certificates, and 2 of them are working towards their TASOC, American high school diploma type of thing. We have those different paths within there. We've looked at how are we, presenting transcripts, how are we presenting, college recommendation letters and things like that to truly reflect the child's, skills and what they're receiving. There are schools definitely that have gone down the path of having that modified diploma, and I think that that's something that we need to really seriously be considering. And I think different programs have been developing different the IB's career. Sorry, I forget the name of the other high school program. Sorry, that's my
placement programs, or
no. Within the IB, they have the fourth, not the diploma program, but then there's the fourth career readiness program. So I mean, there's ways that we need to be looking at this and supporting that. And I think the IB, there's flexibility within there as well too. I mean, we have a student this year that that needs support in some areas, but really strong in other areas. And so being able to achieve, the IB certificates in those courses, and then, a modified math program, for example, completely, but again, reflecting that and working with them on what their college aspirations are, what their post-school aspirations are, and helping support that. And I think that's our duty. Our duty isn't just to say, sorry, you don't fit the mold, and so you're not graduating and good luck type of thing. And I think it's important that we do figure out what that looks like for each student.
I really I'm just kind of scrolling through the chat too, as well as realizing, that idea of awareness, right? And it's just making it aware is like shedding light on a potential issue. And when it comes to light, it's easier for everybody to deal with. So as a leader in your school, I imagine that you're shedding that light on and supporting TAs who, again, they'll outlast us in these positions 9 out of 10 times. They're the ones that will be staying. They're the ones that are in the schools with the students, know the families, and that are here for a lot longer than generally teachers are. So how much time and devotion is put into the TAs being taught or being supported, and being, raising awareness amongst TAs when it comes to the inclusion model that you're discussing?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, in our context here, and probably a lot of different countries, when we're hiring teacher assistants, we're hiring them locally. They're often not, fully trained and qualified, and so it's our responsibility to do that, and we embed that within our program. Our principal, our elementary principal, does a considerable amount of training with the teacher assistants. In our context here, our learning support teacher that's been here for 3 years, she's fantastic. She worked at International School Manila before, and was a one-on-one educational assistant. She's a fully certified, teacher, special education teacher, and in her time in Manila, she moved into a teacher role. And so I was very fortunate to hire her in this context. And she is, very empathetic and supportive of the teacher assistants in their local context, because she experienced that herself. And so she has a really nice way with supporting the teacher assistants and the educational assistants she's working with, and the teachers, to really fully understand the role of a teacher assistant and what they're able to do, and how we're able to support and train them as well. But yeah, it's definitely our responsibility. And I think, again, the role is, in my context, I'm not doing that direct training per se, but certainly setting the conditions, the time, the place for that, I think is crucial.
So, and and I love this question that just popped up too, is RTI. We're very big here at ICS ADIS. We're very, very big on the whole RTI process. So the in-class, in-school, tier 1 and tier 2 approach, and then moving, using an RTI strategy that is effective for, 85% of our students in class and in schools, and then where they move along the continuum into, monitored and data-driven tier 2 strategies. And then really it's that idea of the tier 2 to tier 3 is, are they responding to interventions? That's when we need to get them into the tier 3 kind of area, and where they are getting the psych eds and the evaluations. And it's difficult again for all of our schools, because we're dealing with 0.5 psychologists, school psychologists, and how dependent are you on your RTI process or your RTI in the everyday classroom in order to become or in order to say that you're an inclusive school, to claim you're an inclusive school.
Yeah, and that comes back to what we were talking about before in terms of the role of the teacher and everyone's kind of involvement in that. And I think, again, we need to really make sure we're supporting our learning support teachers in being adult learner. Teachers of adults as well. So we have to provide our teachers with the resources, the tools, and the information, and that needs to happen through whether it be workshops and professional learning, but then also on that day-to-day, these are some strategies, and we often we've all worked with teachers where we're talking about a strategy and they're only maybe trying it once, but you got to stick with it for 6 weeks, and so it's providing that support and that encouragement, and so getting the model of learning support teachers having time in classrooms to co-teach and to because that's not only benefiting the students, but it's benefiting the teachers within their other classes as well too, type of thing, in terms of modeling and then practicing and implementing that. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of that's got to come from, and especially when we're dealing with recommendations of students, there's a lot of time and effort that has to go into that to make sure that we're making the right decisions. And then in terms of this child needs testing or this child needs whatever additional support they need, type of thing.
So yes, I'm going to go back to how does a school gauge? How would you say a school would gauge their inclusivity? Is that a fair question? How? Because if we think that we're doing everything right and we're at a school that's doing everything right, or we're in a school we don't agree and we don't think that they're doing it right, how does a school kind of take that inventory of itself with themselves? And I mean, again, shedding light on it is, if they feel they're lacking, how can a school become more inclusive? Or if they feel like, hey, we're an inclusive school, what is going to take us to that next level? So I guess it's a three-pronged question. How does that initial inventory take place to see whether the school is indeed an inclusive school? What do you do if you realize like, oh, we're missing the mark on some things and these are the things that we're able to work on? Or, we're meeting the mark and we really want to push it further in order for our students to, achieve at higher levels, so that we're a highly effective and learning progressive school moving forward. How would an inventory or a gauge of inclusivity take place?
Yeah. So the NFI, the Next Frontier Inclusion Group, developed a really useful protocol, and it's one that a lot of schools have used now, and it's called Towards Inclusion. That's what it looks like. And it's basically it's an audit review protocol for use by schools, and I've used it within my own school context in Manila here. There's basically 4 domains: building common understanding and meaning within the community, designing and delivering the service, developing professional capacity, and evaluating and improving the program. And within there's a continuum, and so there's descriptors under each of those. It's your continuum from exploring it, we're at that stage, and there's descriptors for that too. We're actually living it and we're transforming it. And this has been a really useful tool for schools. I think to really look at honestly looking at where they're at, and we've turned it into like some Google Forms to get everyone in, the teachers and learning support teachers and leaders to all complete where they think they're at, and then bringing that data together and really looking and analyzing and being able to pinpoint it. Another tool I've used is a troubleshooter tool that looks at those domains of, we have a common understanding. We're really doing a good job of developing professional capacity, but we're missing that whole notion of we don't have the design and the delivery down yet. So we really need to focus on that area. So there are some of those tools. I've been involved in a couple of school visits, and people involved in NFI as well have gone to different international schools to provide those supports. I've gone in and done a week where we use that tool to really help a school analyze where they're at and where they need to head. But it's a great tool. And many people, we've had many schools represented at our NFI conferences, and this tool is always a focus of that, and providing us an opportunity to really look and reflect at where we are on that inclusion continuum.
Interesting. So my question, I don't know if you've ever done an audit on on us, so I'll mind my tongue, but so
yeah.
in the AISA context, and again, looking at the comments, like a fully inclusive school where, for example, we have, 2 full-time student support teachers. We have 6 TAs that run from this is all in a high school, mind you. We have a half-time director of SST. We have a half-time school psychologist. So we're trying our best, because ideally we would like to say we are a fully inclusive school. And I mean, these are students that we're taking, some very, very low functioning, whether they're autistic or Down syndrome students, and require require those, and when I say exceptional, I mean outside of the I guess I don't want to say traditional, but that regular routine model in order to have the academic resource. We have more than a dozen EAL students. So what we're doing is really considering our population in regards to support them, so that we're able to not be able to turn away students that require that student support team, constantly monitoring them, putting the information into Power School so that all teachers are on board and all teachers are seeing the progresses that we're making, or the gains or insights that we're having as well. So, I mean, I'm seeing questions of like full inclusivity. Is that even possible in the international school context? And I think it really goes back to what you were saying earlier too, is it like we do our best to do what we can to be a fully inclusive school, and using the resources amongst our association is that it's also vital. Do you provide an opportunity for other teachers or other administrators and leadership to reach out to you in regards to asking questions, like past this webinar, to say like, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying? Is that something that, as far as taking that inventory, and I know you said you're doing it through the NFI, which is fantastic, but is there a way in order that we can really up our game as an association of schools, so that we're being more of that mindset of inclusivity?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's, what it comes down to, our role as leaders, and I don't know how many leaders are on the webinar today, but it's our job to build the capacity and that moral will to serve. And I think, there's going to be challenges and there's roadblocks. And if you brought in our SST team here right now, they would list all the things that we need to improve on and that we need to work on. But we're not giving up. We're not stopping doing it. And we're being realistic as well. I have a child that was exited from this school when I first arrived, and I accepted him back in with a full-time assistant. And it was going to be for 1 year while the family figured it out. At the end, he's in grade 10 right now. He's going to go on and he'll be able to do his his IB diploma and that. So again, it's not being afraid to to try different things at the same time, being honest, being open, being realistic, and knowing what your limits are as well too. I think it's important that we are there for each other, and there's a ton of great resources and people within the continent. I know Sue Smalls that was at IS Kenya. She's now leading a school in Nairobi. I don't remember the name of the school, but she's been very involved in the continent with that. There's many of us that are on the continent, and that we're happy to support each other, and anyone's welcome to reach out to me, and I can connect you to other people. We're actually holding a conversation in Dar at International School Tanganyika in a couple weeks, November 15th. There's still room available for anyone that wants to come. We're doing it's a 3-day event about building capacity, and we've got a really interesting model. And what we're doing now is the first day of the conference, we're actually including students, learning support students, and their parents. Sitting at each of the tables together with teachers and leaders, because we often talk about building programs for inclusion, but we don't include the people that it affects the most. And so within this model and this conference, we're including them as we look at building our common understanding and definitions of inclusion, and then what kind of supports and systems we want to put in place in our schools. But very happy to support and be involved with anyone.
So I like that you also start with that idea of like capacity building and having the open and frank discussions about what an inclusive school looks like. So really like giving a baseline definition about what it is that means, and then the first steps leading into. We've also seen here that there was a number of people who said that they've done the NFI audit, and that also gave them good guidance in regards to being a more inclusive school using RTI process. And I think most of our schools are knee deep in using the proper response to intervention in regards to inclusion. I think maybe the last question, and if there's anything else that you'd like to add, is how can highly inclusive school further develop practices within their own schools? Or what would you like to see? Maybe it's being a little fantastical, but what would you like to see as far as an AISA school being able to project the fantastic things that they're doing indeed within their schools at school level? And what are our next steps?
Yeah, and I think everyone's on a different continuum of, we've got in the AISA region, we have small schools, we have medium-sized schools, we have large schools, we're all faced with this challenge. And I think it's figuring out ways to support each other. I talked about earlier, we have an ed psych here. We did a lot of research, we found the right person, and that's been huge for our community. And bringing someone like that here to Kinshasa is fantastic. And I can pass on her contact information to anyone as well. And she's actually now engaging with a couple other international schools. And so we have to be able to think outside the box, but we can't do that alone. We need right. The support of each other and learning from each other. And so, so not being afraid to engage. We had our AISA heads of school retreat was in September in Victoria Falls, and we had an open conference session, and one of the questions that came up was inclusion, and about 15 of us just sat around and talked about what we're doing and how we're supporting students and what different things we're doing in our schools. And I think that's important, and I think we need to just keep challenging ourselves. If we have the resources and we have the opportunity, we should be expanding and figuring out how it's impacting our schools, and not being afraid. I mean, you hear some schools that we don't want to take those students because it's going to lower our test scores and that. And there's ways to really look at what impact it's having on the whole community. And I think it's huge. So yeah, I encourage everyone again to take that, continue that will to serve, and take the frustrations and challenges that come and turn those around to be positives and opportunities to collaborate further and work together.
That's fantastic. And I love the idea of, you know, the participant, rather the participants, the attendees in this is we'll really challenge them to push. And I always encourage teachers to ask me, like, be frank, ask the question. What is the question that you want to know? So as an administrator in school, I always encourage teachers to ask their leadership, what is the direction in regards to inclusion or RTI, whatever it might be. But for the purpose of this conversation is not to be shy. And again, encouraging teachers to ask their administrators and leaders, what is it that defines them as an inclusive school to their leadership as well. So to, again, keep the conversation going. I love that you're saying that the model continues. And I think sometimes as administrators, we don't always necessarily see what's happening at every moment and every day and through the eyes and lenses of every student and every teacher and every SST team member, but that as long as that these students, or rather these teachers, know that we're supporting them as best as we can, to keep that dialogue open is something that's vital in regards to creating an inclusive school.
I wasn't reading the chat on the side panel there, but you know, I'm reading it now and seeing some great comments and other questions as well. I put my email address at the bottom there. I mean, if you have a specific question that wasn't answered, please email it to me, and I'm happy to write back or send some resources as well. Yeah, I even saw Michelle Ireland, who's here right now. She just posted something as well too in terms of the work she's doing at our school and that. So yeah, it's great. There's a lot of great resources out there and people, and I'm happy to connect people as well. So just send me an email.
Well, if you have any closing words or last anecdotes that you want to share with us, now's your opportunity, sir.
Yeah, no, you know, I look at it was interesting because I like to end with. I started with Danielle, and I'll end with her. You know, after when I first started, you know, doing a lot of work in inclusion, I went back to figure out what happened to Danielle, and she ended up graduating from high school, and she works in a hair salon in the small town we were working in, and is living a productive, successful life. And you know, it's fantastic to you know to see that purpose and that drive and you know, exciting. You know, thought I was making many mistakes, but it's led to a good passion.
That's amazing. Thank you for a lovely conversation this Halloween evening, sir. And I look forward to meeting you face to face shortly. Again, all the contact information is there. It will also get posted to the site. So if you have any more questions for Mr. Simon Gillespie, feel free to contact him. If you have any questions, obviously, you know, you have for me, Mr. Nick Jana, ICS Addis. My contact information is also on the site. So, sir, thank you for a lovely conversation and dialogue, and to be continued for another day. Thank you.